Well, good evening, LCM.
Good evening.
Today is August 22nd, and it's a Thursday. Yeah. Hey, do we have any covenant carriers in this place? I mean, like men and women that God has made a covenant with, and they're proud of it, and they walk with it, and they carry it around. Man, we learned on Sunday that when God cuts a covenant with a man, or with man, he does it to fulfill his own purposes, right? That's what his mind, and when he does it with a man, now he puts his name upon that man. That man not only carries his own name, first and foremost, he carries God's name, right? And in carrying God's name, God is completely invested in fulfilling his covenant. Why? Because he's carrying God's name. What God does, because a man is carrying God's name, is that then he stretches out his arm and he presents his power and his majesty and everything that he's got to fulfill the promises that he has made to that man. Why? Because the man is carrying his name. Because the man is now working for God's purposes. Because he no longer lives for himself, but God has placed his name upon him. Because he's a carrier of God's covenant. So God is invested in that purpose that he promised, and he stretches out his arm to display his power to fulfill his covenant. It is not a small thing that men and women in this room have been called to covenant. It is not a small thing that God has said, you I have chosen, come and partake in my covenants. You who were far off, who were without hope and without God. It is not a small thing that God, the heaven and earth, has called you to partake in his covenant. And because it's not a small thing that he's done this, we are of the most privileged of men and women. The fact is that covenants that have not seen its fulfillment call for men and women who carry the covenant to work to see that fulfillment. When covenants are not come to fruition completely, it calls for men and women of God to work wholeheartedly to see the covenant that they carry come to completion. In fact, the verse that the pastors use as the premise for the entire message is found in Deuteronomy 10:8. And that's where we're going to start tonight.
So let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 8 together. When you get, as you turn, say there. There it is. It says, at that time, church say at that time. At that time, the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, to minister to him, and to bless his name to this day. Guys, it says at that time. What time? It was the time when Israel had forsaken the covenant that they had entered into with God. Yet the tribe of Levi, the men of Levi heeded the call of Moses. Whoever is for the Lord, come to me. Man, I want that to be said about me. That when a call was put out by God, I answered the call. I said, here I am. They were these types of men. They elevated and prioritized their covenant with God above all else. Nothing was more important. Their countrymen weren't more important. Their desires weren't more important. What they saw as of the utmost importance is I'm going to be where God is. I'm going to be near to God. And he does exactly that. They would carry the ark. They would be covenant carriers. They would stand before Yahweh. They would minister to Jehovah. And they would bless in his name. Church, as a result of their actions, they had wholehearted devotion. They gave their full heart to the devotion to the covenant. And as a result, the Lord drew them near to himself. They drew him near to his side. And the result is ministry to the people. The purpose of the Levites and the purpose of the Lord drawing them near so that they would be a blessing to the people and they would be able to minister on behalf of God because they were wholehearted in their devotion. In fact, the Levites demonstrated a special, willing, and unrestrained devotion to the covenant. They weren't looking to be chosen for some special task. There was no selfish ambition. In fact, they didn't even know what they would be called to when they answered the call, but they saw it as important anyway. There was only covenant faithfulness and devotion to their God. However, this was the devotion to the covenant that every Israelite had committed to demonstrate.
So with the Levites, we know that they were chosen because of their special devotion. But as my brother Timo said, that was not some special devotion. It was not for just the Levites to have. That was the devotion that every Israelite should have demonstrated. But the Levites stood up when that needed to be demonstrated, and they received a service. They received that charge because of that devotion, because they were faithful to that covenant. That is what we're talking about here. A lot of us have ministry aspirations, and we really have to search our hearts of where that's coming from. Because when the Levites received that charge, they didn't receive it because they had ministry aspirations. They just received that charge because they were demonstrating a faithful devotion to the covenant of God. And so they rose up because the situation called for it. They didn't have any attached feelings to it. They didn't have anything of interest to them. They only said, I'm going to join to the Lord. And that's why they received that charge. So we're going to go back to the book of Exodus. And we're going to walk through the covenant making process. Are you okay with that? Oh, yeah. Back in Exodus 6, El Shaddai began to reveal himself as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, or Yehovah. He stretched out his mighty redemptive, mighty arm. In demonstrating his faithfulness to the covenant that he had made with Abraham, he stretched out his arm to bring it about. What happened is that you have a Red Sea parting, you have sweetening of bitter waters, you have manna and quail from heaven, you have water from a rock, you have a defeat of the Amalekites, which are a much powerful army than the Israelites, who were barely slaves coming out of Egypt. Can you say God is faithful? Yeah. He's faithful. He stretched out his arm to deliver these people. And it happens to be that in the 3rd month, after they had left Egypt, in the 3rd month of their exodus, they arrived at a mountain called Mount Sinai. And this is what Jehovah says to him. Exodus 19 verse 4. Say there when you're there. It says, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. And these are the words that God has spoke to us twice tonight. The Father says, I have been faithful. You have seen it with your own eyes. You saw what I did to the Egyptians. You have seen my works. But then he says something. He says, now, what I'm asking from you is that you heed my words. You have seen my works. Now come and heed my words. Obey my voice. Guard my covenant. If you respond to my faithfulness with covenant devotion, then you will be a kingdom of priests to me. Then you will be a royal and a holy priesthood, a holy nation unto me. This is kind of like, this is marriage language, right? And so it's like husbands that, can you tell your wife, can you come to her and tell her, you have seen my works. You have seen my work. You have seen my deliverance. You have seen how I've poured out myself for you. You have seen how I have died for you. Therefore, heed my words. Well, that's what any husband should be able to say to his wife. Because the Father expects submission from Israel, his bride, once he's demonstrated his works and his mighty arm to deliver them. Once he has poured out, once he has demonstrated that he is the Redeemer, then he comes and says, hey baby, come follow me. Come obey my voice. Come heed my words. Come be faithful to my covenant. Moses relays these words to Israel, and they respond with, we will do everything that the Lord has spoken. And you probably know the story. The Father hasn't spoken anything at this point. They're just responding. They're responding with eager hearts. They haven't received a law. They haven't received commands. They're just saying, God just said, you just got to be faithful to my covenant. But they're eager and they respond. And the story goes on to say that the Father descended on top of Mount Sinai. You remember that, right? And the Mount Sinai was enveloped with smoke and fire, with the mountain quaking. And then God speaks before all the assembly of Israel. And this is a precious moment. God's voice is heard. God's voice among all the tumult and all the fire and the quaking and the smoke, God's voice is heard from that mountain. And the voice is what He had said that they must obey. That voice of God. That's what He says. If you obey my voice, then I will make you into a kingdom of priests. And that voice says something very special. You know these 10 commandments. He says, I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I am Yehovah. I am Yahweh. He places what He's going to say upon His own name. Because now they're covenant carriers. So He says, I am the Lord. And He says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before my face. You shall not put any other God in front of me. I am your God. You have no idols of any form. Nothing should take my place. Nothing should have your devotion. I am your God. And you are to have no idols. Nothing that competes with me. You know why? Because God says that He's a jealous God. He will not take another. He does not share His glory with another. He's a jealous God. He says, no idols for you. You shall not take my name in vain. What He's referring to is that when your oaths in His name, they're a yes. They're a no, but there's nothing in between. When you use His name, you don't use it in vain. It's His name and His name is holy. He says that we must, or to Israel, that they must remember the Sabbath. They must keep it holy. It's the special day devoted unto the Lord, to nothing else, to the work of the Lord, to the rest in the Lord, to the meditation of the Lord, to the sanctity of His name. You must honor your father and mother. Man, He's laying down some commandments. He's laying down the groundwork. He's saying, if you are faithful to these commandments, then you will be my royal priesthood. He goes on with those commandments.
What a faithful God that we have. That He has made a covenant with us, and He's making a covenant here with the nation of Israel. But He also gives us commands, also gives us laws so that we might be able to be obedient. That's something that cannot be taken for granted. He's giving us the path that leads to life. Number 6 here, you shall not murder. Of course, do not take away the very thing that your brother needs for life. He's teaching us how to operate in community. You shall not commit adultery. Do not take away the very essential and necessary ezer that I've given to your brother by breaking not one, but 2 covenants here. He says, do not steal. Don't take away from your brother or anything else, something that they need to live and move and have their being. He is teaching them the path that leads to life so that they might be able to walk in it. What an amazing thing. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What it speaks about in Exodus 23, for just brief aside, it says, do not protect a wicked man by giving malicious witness. What he's speaking here is, no, don't give a false testimony, because what you're doing is you are robbing the victim here of justice. He is teaching us a path that leads to life so that if we obey it, we might have life and life to the fullest. As we go on in our story, the appearance and the sound of thunder, lightning, fire, and smoke. The ram's horn was so terrifying. This is the Lord showing Israel His glory, that this isn't something to be taken for granted, that this isn't something to be treated as light, but this is the very presence of God, that He wants to come on His people and that He wants to be near to His people so that they might know who He is. It says that they asked Moses to speak to God and they relay His words to them. So as we go on throughout this beautiful story, this is what Moses does. God speaks to him and gives him not just these 10 that we've read, but gives him additional instructions regarding their relationship to one another, properties and boundaries, ruling with justice, their social responsibility to one another, mercy towards the brothers and enemies, brothers and enemies, Sabbath laws, feasts. And then we get to our chapter in 24. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 24, and we'll start in verse 7.
Stay there when you get there.
We've been speaking about the covenant and going back to when it started and laying some groundwork here. But here in Exodus 24, starting in 7, this is when we get to see God cut the covenant. This is when the covenant is made with Israel, and it is an extremely important point. It's an extremely important point in Israel's history. Yeah. It says in verse 7, "Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, 'All the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient.'" Carlos mentioned it before, the kind of wedding language that the Lord is using here. This is like a ketubah, or a marriage contract, or perhaps in better words, a marriage covenant. It's not a contract. It's a relationship that he's having between us. But this language that the Lord is using here requires reciprocation from his people. And the people say, we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, "Behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord had made with you in accordance with all these words." Moses read the book of the Torah with the words of God that Moses had written. They understand that their commitment to the covenant is evidenced in obedience to these words. They can't be things that are just put to the side, but they know if we're going to be obedient to the covenant, we must have actions and obedient actions that follow it. Yeah. Having committed to obedience, they have been sprinkled with the blood of the covenant. They're washed clean. They're purified and set apart by the blood covenant. That is incredible. Blood for the forgiveness of sins that Hebrews 9:22 talks about, but the covenant is cut. Here you see the same reciprocation. Moses sprinkles the blood on the people and on the altar, and what God does is he makes the covenant himself. It was important to him because he longs to engage with his people. He longs to be close to his people and have that marriage relationship with them. Married, no longer their own, redeemed and one with God.
So let me give you a little summary up to this point so that we don't lose you. From Mount Sinai, God has spoken his words, and they heard them. Not only did they hear those words, but God continued to give some instructions to Moses as he was in the mountain. And then those instructions, Moses wrote on a book that is called the Book of the Covenant. Those instructions, then Moses read aloud to the people. And the people said, "All that the Lord has commanded, we will do." But that's not enough. That's not enough for God. They have already heard their words. Not only have they heard the words of God from the mountain, they've also heard the words of God through Moses. And that's not enough for God. We can go to Exodus chapter 24, verse 12. It says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, that I may give you the tablets of stone, with the law and the commandment which I have written for the instruction.'" I don't know, when we read this verse, it really moved our hearts. It endeared us to our Father. You see, you can hear the heart of the Father. He's already spoken the words, but that's not enough. He knows that that's not enough for them. Moses has already read their words, and he knows that's not enough. So what does the Father say he's going to do? "Hey, Moses, come up to me, and I will give you tablets of stone with these commandments inscribed upon them." They must have my commandments inscribed upon them. And they're not inscribed by Moses. They would be inscribed by God. And so in his faithfulness, he desires not only for them to hear the words, he desires them to have their words written for them. He's invested in this relationship. Can you tell? He's not going to go halfway, 10%, 50%. He's willing to go beyond what we would ever think or imagine. They never left Egypt thinking that God's going to write down his commandments with his own finger on tablets of stone. But God is faithful, and he's working so that they be faithful to him. Our awesome Father is going to give him stones with his own handwriting. But these commandments are not to be flippantly carried under your shoulder, under your armpit. These commandments are special. These stones are special. This handwriting is special. It came from God. And so He gives them further instructions because what He has given them is very special. They are to build an ark. They are to build an ark for a specific purpose. This ark would be His footstool on earth. This ark would be the place that would represent the merging of heaven and earth. This would be the place where heaven meets earth because God's presence, His footstool is there and He's seated on His throne. The place to be, for Him to be enthroned in between the cherubim here on earth. The place from which Moses would speak, from which God would speak to Moses. The place from which God would dwell among His people. Can you say that's special? That's special. That is extremely special.
Would you agree that the precious nature of this ark cannot be overstated?
Yeah.
It cannot be. Up until this point, God has given them his commands. He's given them the demands of his covenant. And then after that, he's making a place. He's making a place for those laws to be able to be put in. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 25 and verse 16. He says, "You shall put into the ark the testimony that I shall give you." So what testimony is this? Exodus 31 and verse 18. He gave to Moses, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony, the 2 tablets of stone written with the finger of God. God was completely invested in this covenant. It was important to him. I don't want to just move past here and breeze by how significant this was to God. He not only wants them to have a place where they can read on a permanent setting, on a permanent place, His commandments, but He wants them to be able to carry it. He wants them to be able to have it wherever they go. He wants it to be able to be held in high regard and high esteem wherever they go. And so He's created this place so that the tablets that He inscribes with His own hand would be seen by them and carried by the people. They were carried inside the ark, the testimony of God's covenant, the commands inscribed by His own finger, the Spirit of God on tablets of stone, to be in the center of the people of Israel. The people would dwell, the place where God would dwell, also the place where the commandments inscribed by God would be carried. Something that we were talking about when we were studying. Anyone could have inscribed these. He could have commissioned anyone to do it. He could have had Moses do it. He could have had Aaron do it. Well, perhaps not. But he could have had anyone do it, but it was significant to him that he put his finger, the Spirit of God, into these tablets so that they would know that this is a covenant that God is making with them and no other.
Why couldn't simply anybody write on these stones? Because they were the stones of the testimony. They were a testimony to the Israelites that God had delivered them. That these weren't just anybody's commandments. These were the commandments of their God. And these commandments were precious, and they would be among them. And they would be in a special sacred place, which is called the Ark of the Testimony, or the Ark of the Covenant that God made with His people. So this Ark of the Testimony and this Ark of the Covenant and the tablets of stone were so important and were so precious to the people that 500 years later, in the time of Solomon, when Solomon built the temple and brought the ark inside of the temple, look at what happened. Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 9. We're gonna get to our title, but just say there when you are there for now. It says, chapter 8, verse 9, it says, "There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone that Moses put there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the people of Israel. When they came out of the land of Egypt, and when the priests came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord." What's happening here? that you have the Ark of the Covenant that's been around for about 500 years. It's been floating around. He goes from the tabernacle of Moses. He goes through the tent of David. And he comes finally to a place of rest in the temple of Solomon. And when Solomon builds a place for it, and they bring the ark, the only thing that is inside that ark is the commandments that God inscribed with his own finger. And when they bring him inside, and the priests step out, what happens? That the glory of the Lord fills the temple. That whenever you have the stones, the commandments of God properly written and properly carried inside the ark, and they come to rest at the place that God chooses, then what God wants to do is reveal his glory and fill that temple. That was the essence, that was the reason of why God chose an ark. That's the reason why God gave him commandments. Those commandments needed to be among the people. They needed to be in the center of the people because he wanted to inhabit the center of God's people. Let's continue on Deuteronomy 6 verse 4, which tells you where those commandments are supposed to be written.
Can you see that God is being faithful here? He's being faithful to his covenant and being faithful to his people. Chapter 6 and verse 4 says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall with all your heart and with all your soul and all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be upon your heart." The heart that he's speaking about here is not the organ that's inside of our body. The word is lev, and it's not speaking about biology. It's speaking about the center of a person, the center of a man, the man's inmost being. He's saying, this is where you should keep the law. This is where you should keep these commands on your hearts, and we're intended to carry them. Devotion and love for this covenant is displayed in carrying the word wherever we go. The word is meant to be carried upon our hearts, the center of our core. These commands are to be on our hearts at all times. Church, I know you. I know that you're people who do not leave the commands at home, who do not leave the commands on the back of the back dash of their car. But you are a people who take the commands because you are covenant carriers, and you take them to work. You take them into team decisions that you make. You take them into the pastoring of your wives and of your children. You take them when you're making decisions about what to do in an evening or a trip to go on or how much money or all of the money that you're going to give. You are the people that are covenant carriers because you take it everywhere that you go. These are the kind of people that God is making the Israelites into and is commanding them to be those that keep it and take it with them when they walk along the road, when they sit down and when they go out, to impress it on their children, when they arise and when they lie, to tie it as symbols on their doorposts and symbols on their hands. This is what God has called the people to do. And because he's being faithful to the covenant and giving them these commands, our reciprocation and the reciprocation of the people of Israel must be to be obedient to those commands.
It says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And that kind of love would be evidenced in how you carry the commandments. That kind of love would be evidenced on where those commandments are laid up. And they're supposed to be laid up on our heart. Carrying the commandments at the center of Israel's heart was how God chose for them to display covenant faithfulness. God said, Jesus put it this way, if you love me, obey my commandments. God's love language is obedience, and that is what he's telling them in Deuteronomy 6. However, we know what happened. I mean, we've been partakers in what happened. Meaning they broke the covenant. And they broke it badly. Not once, many times.
Very bad. Bad.
Very bad. But their failure did not nullify God's faithfulness, did it?
No.
Did it or not?
No.
Our failure, Israel's failure, did not nullify God's faithfulness. He made a covenant with Abraham. He swore the same promise to Isaac, and he confirmed it to Jacob. He was moving from generation to generation, sustaining his covenant and sustaining his people. He stretched out his arm in the time of Moses to continue to build his covenant relationship with his people. And he ratified these promises by making a covenant with David. He was not giving up because of man's failure. He is faithful over man's failure. God will not back down on a covenant or His promises that He has made, because His nature is that He is faithful. When He speaks with His mouth, you know what He does? He fulfills that with His right arm. He speaks something, and He doesn't just lay what He spoke right there. He then goes on the move. He now gets to work.
Come on.
He brings the things that He promised to pass, because that is His nature. He is a faithful God who fulfills His promises. He was faithful to speak these words to Israel. He was faithful to tell Moses, hey, write them down and then proclaim them among the assembly. He was then faithful to write these words for Israel. And the Israelites were not faithful to carry His words, which He had told them to carry. God, however, like we said, is not taken back by man's unfaithfulness.
No.
And you have to understand that this is not a license to sin. And we are LCM, and we don't preach a license to sin, because that's crazy. But at the same time, you're in this tension between, yes, my God is faithful, and this is not a license to sin. You're in the tension between, my God will fulfill His promise, and yet He expects covenant devotion from me. My love language to my Father is having His commandments be written upon my heart, loving Him to the point of obedience or die trying. Loving Him to the point of holiness or die trying. That is responding to His covenant faithfulness. And yet, in our desire, in our intentions to obey Him, we gotta be real. We also fall flat on our faces. In our intentions to be wholly obedient to Him, sometimes we just go astray. Sometimes we just don't see the road. Sometimes we get entangled by our own desires. Sometimes we can't see ahead. Sometimes we grow weak. Sometimes we're disappointed. Sometimes we just lose it. And we forget to put the commandments where they're supposed to be. We forget to honor the covenant with the love and obedience that He said to honor it with. And so God has a solution for this. Because God is not taken by surprise by your unfaithfulness. God is not taken by surprise by your weakness or your wickedness. God has made a covenant with His own people. And so He continues to support that covenant. And that's why we have a chapter such as Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31 is starting in verse 31. It says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. Not like that covenant. I mean, isn't He already being faithful, speaking the words, writing them from, He's stretched out of His arm and bring them deliverance? Not like that one. What can He be talking about? He says, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. You mean that not only does God speak the words, not only does God tell Moses to speak the words, not only does He write the words, not only does He raise up prophets to remind them of the words, but He also says that I myself will write the words upon their heart. You see how committed God is to His own covenant and His own people? This is how committed He is. He will do this Himself. You may ask yourself, but how? How will God write these words in the Israelites' hearts? How will God write these words in my heart? I mean, at any time of the day, we may be faced with our own failures. Timo is a godly man, so he doesn't leave the commandments on the back dash of his car. But at any point in time, when you're not watching, when you're not guarding your heart, it may happen that you do. It may happen that the commandments that are supposed to be in your heart are somewhere else, not to be found. Come on, man. What a wretched man I am is what Paul said. I need help is what I need. I need help to be able to keep those commandments. I need God to write these commandments in my heart. I need God to stretch out His arm and His finger and say, I'm going to write them upon you, my son. I need to have your words in my heart, Father. Because we are tainted. Because our heart is wicked and deceitful. I need to have them written upon my heart. I need to have a new heart. Help me, Timo.
The help that you're asking for, and honestly the help that I'm asking for as well, it's found in the Torah. Because it's meant to incline our hearts. In fact, it's supposed to be written on our hearts. But how does that happen? But before I get there, as a matter of fact, the title of our message this evening, you all have been waiting very patiently. It is called Written on Our Hearts. Somebody say, written on our hearts. When the Israelites were too afraid to hear the words of God Himself, the words from the mouth of God, the words that our spirit and our life, they cried out for a mediator that would hear the words, that they would hear the words of God through. And this is what God responds in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 17 through 19. Say there as you turn in there. And the Lord said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers. And I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I commanded. For one, they're right this time. They were right to have asked the Lord for a mediator. And God would raise up for them a prophet. And guess what? It isn't Moses. He's speaking to Moses here and telling him it would be like Moses. They're asking that Moses speak to them and not God. But God says, yeah, I will raise up a prophet for them. This prophet, this mediator, this brother, he would have the words of God in his mouth. He would raise up one who is in very nature God, but still a man. He is the one that would speak these words and by God's Spirit write them on their hearts so that he would also do the same for us.
Are you catching this? The time when the Israelites were so afraid of the presence of God, they told Moses, hey, Moses, don't let God speak to us. I mean, no man can see God and live, right? And they were not seeing the fullness of who God is, but His presence was so terrifying that the Israelites are like, we need a mediator. And they're telling Moses, you Moses, you speak to us. And in the moment, God says, yeah, no, they're right. They're right for what they're asking. But it won't be you that speaks to them. I will raise up a prophet for them. I will raise up a prophet that will speak to them. And you know what? That prophet will have my words, God's words in his mouth. That is the promise that God gave the Israelites at the moment when they realized that they could not hear the words of God, that they could not stand in God's presence. They needed a mediator. So who is this prophet? Jesus. Yes. Jesus. Who is this mediator?
Jesus.
Who is this brother? Say it again. This Yeshua, Jesus, he's the Son of God. He's the exact representation, the image of the invisible God. Yeshua is the exactness of God's glory. Yeshua is the one that holds everything by his own powerful word. Yeshua is the one that was granted this authority and this honor to have the words of God, to have the same words of God in his lips and proclaim them to his people. Yeshua is the one that was granted the privilege of writing these words upon his people's hearts. As promised, Yeshua came and he spoke to his people. And how did he speak to them? He first started in Matthew 5. And you know these verses, and we're going to engage with something that we think is like basic Christianity, and it is not. What these verses are the Torah. What these verses are is how we uphold the covenant. These verses tell us how to carry his covenant. Yeshua is speaking the words of the covenant when he speaks here. We're going to start in Matthew 5 verse 17. It says, Do not think that I have come to abolish the law, the Torah, or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota nor a dot will pass from the law until it is all accomplished. Therefore, whoever, I don't like this version here, whoever relaxes or breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, what does he say that he came to do? He did not come, the prophet that God prophesied about, the prophet that will have the words of God in his mouth, he did not come to abolish the Torah or the prophets. As a matter of fact, he came to fulfill them. And not only did he come to fulfill them, he came to speak them. He came to write them upon people's hearts. That's what he came for. It says that whoever does these commandments and also teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. What do you have to do before you do the commandments? This is the pattern throughout scriptures. What did Ezra do? He devoted himself to study. He devoted himself to do. And then he devoted himself to teach. So Yeshua is starting here and saying, hey, you know what? You hear my words. You study my words. Then go ahead and do them. And go ahead and teach them. If you become one of these, you will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Why? Because you're taking the commandments of God. You're taking the stones the commandments that Yeshua wants to write upon the stones of your heart. And you're replicating them among men. You're causing His dominion to be extended. You're causing His presence to be expanded. You're not only satisfied with Him, with you, having the commandments with you. You have to go and take the commandments to another person, to another being, to another family. And you want God to rule. You want His glory to manifest among them. And because you do that, because you study and you hear the words, because you do them and you're not a hypocrite, and because you teach them, then you will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. What are these words? The words are the Torah and the prophets. These are the words of the covenant. And Yeshua is not deviating in any regard from what we just read in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, in Numbers, in Deuteronomy. He's not deviating for any of these. Actually, in his Sermon on the Mount, this is the first thing that he does. He clarifies, you know what? Hey, before we get started, let me clarify with something. I did not come to abolish the Torah and the prophets. As a matter of fact, you're going to hear what he's going to say.
So what we're going to do right now is engage with a couple of passages that we may have thought were simple, but we're going to hear the words of the prophet who has promised to engrave the word of the covenant, God's word, on our hearts. Let's turn to verse 21 of Matthew chapter 5.
Do you want to do that?
Yes.
All right.
Verse 21 says, "You have heard that it is said to those of old, 'You shall not murder. Whoever murders will be liable to judgment.'" This is Jesus engaging with the Torah with just what it says. What he begins to go into is speaking about anger towards a brother, hatred towards a brother, that causing the same liability to judgment as murder itself does. I can think about times in my life where I've been extremely angry at my friends for things that weren't important, for things that weren't justified, but my heart was wicked. My heart was sinful. My heart wanted to be offended. And this is why we need this very word. Because as we present our hearts to God, He writes His Torah on our hearts so that we might be able to be clean, so that we might be able to have hearts that are obedient to the Torah and so fulfill the covenant. It goes on to speak about in Leviticus 19:17. You don't have to go there. But it says, "Do not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke him frankly." What does that mean then? Not that I'm offended at my brother, but if I know that my brother is in sin and I do nothing about it, it's no different than hating your brother in your heart. In fact, it is hating your brother in your heart. It's no different than carrying the same liability of judgment. But the solution to this is the solution like every one of these other ones that we will read is is Jesus, the prophet, writing his Torah on our hearts, writing the commands on our hearts that we might be able to carry them and walk in them.
What Yeshua is doing here is being the prophet that's speaking the words of God and writing them on men's hearts. He doesn't just take the do not murder statement. Now what he does is he works to inscribe them, to inscribe and to work in their hearts. That is writing his commandments upon their hearts. Matthew 5:27, it says, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But then, he's not going to just stay there. Now he's going to start digging into people's hearts. Now he's going to start actually writing something. And to write something, he has to get really close to you. To write something upon your heart, he has to come with his finger and start writing upon it. And you can't hide your heart. You can't just shy away from him. Your heart, my heart, needs to be presented before God so that he does what he came to do, which is write his commandments upon our hearts. He's telling us, you know what? Do not commit adultery. You would be breaking 2 covenants if you do. You'd be breaking the covenant with God and you'd be breaking the covenant with your spouse. But let's not stay there, because you may think yourself too self-righteous when you do not commit adultery. Let's dig deeper is what Yeshua says. Let's get closer. He's saying, hey, whenever you look at a woman to lust, you've already committed adultery in your heart. Now, he got really close right there, because everybody was like, no, I'm not committing adultery. As a matter of fact, I'm divorcing my wife before I commit adultery. He's getting really close. All their excuses are gone. Now he's approaching their heart and they're like, he's seeing inside of my life. He's like, he knows my intentions. Why? Did somebody tell him anything? He's getting really close to them and telling them, hey, you know what? Lusting after another woman that is not your wife, lusting after a woman that is not your wife and is somebody else's wife, lusting after a man that is not your husband, that is adultery in your heart. And so it starts piercing the heart, and he's not leaving man there. He's actually writing the Torah in their heart. They had a concept of what the Torah was, but now he's getting really close and writing it by his own words upon their heart. Tell me these words didn't pierce you when you first heard them. Have you become dull to them? Because they are the reality of God's kingdom. They are the reality of the covenant of God. And our obedience and love to him are expressed in pouring out our heart, telling Father, write these commandments upon me, because I cannot do it myself. I need you to write these commandments upon my heart. Matthew 5:33 says, again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. This is aligned with the commandment of you shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. What was he working to write on men's hearts right there? I'll tell you this. I'll tell you what he's worked in my heart. I'll tell you that whenever I say a yes, it has to be a yes. If you committed to do something, if you said no, if you said yes, if you said, no, I have a conviction from God and this is it, why are you taking it back? When you have said yes or no, it's the only testimony that you have of the character of God that you represent. You are a carrier of the covenant of God. And the weighty thing is that when you say yes, you represent God. When you say no, you represent God. And so anything beyond this is of the devil, is what he says. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And if you want to take back your yes, that needs a repentance. If you want to take your no back, that needs a repentance. But we cannot flippantly say yes and then no. We're covenant carriers, and we carry the covenant of God. We carry the ark of God, and those commandments are supposed to be written in our hearts.
Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. It says, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. This scripture comes from Exodus chapter 21 and verse 24. And this isn't speaking about, hey, if Tisdale comes over here and slaps me, I have all rights to slap him back. It's not a license or giving credence to be able to enact vengeance of our own. What this passage speaks about in Exodus 21 is giving guidelines and guidance for God's judicial system so that justice can be accomplished. Because what the Lord is leading towards is life. But when he says to turn the other cheek, this in fact is a call to humble ourselves, a call to humility, a call to turn the cheek. How is the Lord working on our hearts? It's not just so that we would love those who love us, because that's what Gentiles who do not know God do. But it's to love our neighbor and to love our enemies. Your enemies may need the love from you and may need the humility from you and who you are more than your friends do and more than your neighbors do. But this is what the Word of God is doing. This is what Jesus is doing as he's putting the law and the prophets on proper foot, he's fulfilling them.
And he keeps going. Matthew 6 says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. You know, this is how almost every person starts in his genuine relationship with God. I don't care about it. I mean, I don't care what people think about me. I don't care I don't care if I get honored. I don't care if I grow into a position. I don't care if people say good things or bad things. That's the genuine relationship with God. I don't care anybody else except what God says. And then you grow more and more in the kingdom, and it seems that you care more about men's opinions and glory and accolades than we do of God. Little by little, we start deviating and slipping into a very slippery slope of trying to please man and not pleasing God. Jesus said it this way: how can you believe when you accept glory from one another and the glory of God you do not seek? Yeshua is telling them, yes, it is rightful to practice righteousness, but now he starts digging into men's hearts. Who are you doing it for? What are you doing this righteousness for? What are you preaching for? What are you helping others for? What are you giving those words for? Tell me your intentions. What are you doing it for? Is it to be seen and honored by man, or is it to receive an honor and a reward from the God who sees what is done in secret? He digs into men's hearts. Then he tells them about prayer, and he teaches them to pray. And he again is writing prayer upon their hearts. And he starts by saying, our Father, hallowed be your name. The covenant carrier name, the name that is upon them, that's where he starts. Hallowed be your name. And then he doesn't move to his needs. Then he moves to your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It seems like the only thing that can be above the kingdom is the name of the Father. Seek the kingdom first is what he says that we must do. And that is in his prayer. In just praying, he's letting us know what our priorities should be in prayer. And so he's writing them upon our hearts just by praying. And then he says, you know what? And if you're going to ask for something, ask for your daily bread and not the bread for tomorrow. Ask for your bread today. Don't ask for a savings account. Don't ask for greater riches. Don't ask for more comfort. Ask for bread today. Like you don't need anything else except bread. Not even a steak. Bread today. And then he goes on to forgive us our trespasses. He doesn't go into asking something else. He goes into repentance. That is Yeshua's pattern of prayer. Now it's repentance time, buddy. And please deliver us from temptation. I need you to write your commandments upon my heart. Make me strong. Make me courageous. Make me steadfast. Make me determined. Make me have a face like flint. Deliver me from temptation, Father. Isn't that writing something in your heart as we're speaking?
Matthew chapter 6 and verse 25 says, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, or what you will eat or drink, nor your body, or what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and body more than clothing. What was he working into their hearts here? He's referencing back to Exodus 20 and verse 3 that we shall have no gods before him. No gods other than the covenant name of God. No gods other than Yahweh. And what he's speaking about later on is that let us not be like those who are running after treasure, for that is for the pagans. We must not make an idol out of clothes or food or worries that we have about things inside of our lives. I could very much do that very easily today and yesterday. Difficulties at work happening, changes and promises being made. But we are the covenant people of God. We have a covenant with our God. What do we have to worry about? This should inspire confidence as the word is being written on our hearts, that we have nothing to worry about because we carry his name. And his covenant comes with assurances, one of them being that because he is our God and our only God, we can stand with confidence.
Oh, he is faithful to his covenant, and because he's faithful to his covenant, and we are his covenant people, then we do not worry. Period. We do not worry. We do not worry about anything on earth. We do not worry about health, life, clothes, what we eat. We do not worry. Why? Because we are in covenant with God. And so he says, ask, seek, and knock. Why would you ask? Why would you persist in seeking? Why would you be persistent in knocking? Because you are covenant carriers. Because we carry the covenant of God. So if you ask, guess what? He shall answer. If you seek, you shall find, and if you knock, he shall open. He says that is his promise. That is why we don't worry. All you have to do is seek him. All you have to do is carry his covenant. All I have to do is elevate his name, just like we did in worship today. Matthew 7:12 says, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Yeshua is the prophet that was promised that he would speak the words of God to inscribe them upon our heart. And when he's finishing or getting close to finishing this sermon, he tells them, you know what? You want to fulfill the prophets? Do unto others what you would like done unto you. Sounds very simple. In our minds, we kind of expect from others what we would like done unto us. Like, we kind of twist this verse and have expectations from people about what they should do to us because that's what we would do. And what Yeshua is saying is just the opposite. You don't worry about what they'll do to you. You do what you would like done unto yourself. And that is the Torah and the prophets. That is how we fulfill the covenant. That is how we are covenant carriers and faithful to his covenant.
Why do we want this Torah to be written on our hearts? I've been thinking about it all week and realizing that my commitment to the covenant must grow. It must grow. And as we think about the message that we've gotten to share up until this point, God has been faithful. He's been faithful to tell them that he was going to give them a covenant or to give them laws. Then he was faithful to give them those very laws. And if that wasn't enough, he wrote them with his own hand with the Spirit of God on tablets of stones that they might be able to see it, that there might be a permanent representation of it. And then he puts it in an ark so that they can take it wherever they go and so that it can be at the center of their people and at the center of their hearts. And if that wasn't enough, if God wasn't faithful in all of those other things, he writes it on men's hearts and he uses his son to do it. I want my commitment to the covenant to match that. My commitment to the covenant to be like God's as much as I can, as far as I can go. Yeah. And in doing that, the covenant, the commands must be written on our hearts. In order to do that, the commands must be there in such a way that we carry them everywhere. Yeah. Because God's promise and his covenant that he made from the beginning is not void. To want to be his kingdom of priests is a worthy pursuit because, church, we will be. United with his holy nation, Israel, is what we will be. The promise that God made, he will bring it to fulfillment if we can stand and walk as men that are confident and committed to the covenant that God has made with us. We can't do it on our own. But he promised that he would inscribe it on us. I've sat and I've thought, if I could do more work, or if I could do more actions, maybe I can pray more. Maybe I can read all the scripture plans. He makes us the promise that he will do it, which should give us confidence that it will be done. We have the ability to be confident in the outcome, that we will be able to fulfill our part of the covenant that God has made with us.
Please stand up. When the Father made a covenant with us through the blood of his own Son, he made it to fulfill his own purposes. When he did so, he attached his name to us. And he became attached to us through his name to fulfill his covenant promises. Again, it's not a small thing that we have been brought near to him. And his covenant, not having come to fulfillment, calls for our participation, call for our obedience, call for our devotion. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 3. It says, it's really interesting that we see Yeshua writing the Torah in men's hearts. But then let's look at what Paul says. It says, you show that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry. That word is diakoneo, the result of our service. Written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. Not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. This is beautiful. Paul is saying, you know what? The prophet that was to come into the world, Yeshua the Messiah, the Son of God, he spoke the words and he wrote them on men's hearts while he was here. And Paul is saying that the people that he ministered to, they were a letter from Christ. Because through Paul's ministry and his co-workers' ministry, then the Spirit of God moved in such a way that the commandments were inscribed upon their hearts. That is, Yeshua wasn't the only one who did this. Paul and his ministry, and us through our ministry, and this ministry on us has written the words of God in our hearts. And so Paul has this good news, and he tells them, you are a letter from Christ. Something like you are a testimony. Something like you are the ark of the testimony. Because you carry the stones of the testimony written upon your heart. Because you carry the commandments of God upon your heart. And so you're a letter of Christ. You're a letter of God that is meant to be read by the world. It's what Christ says, these are my sons. These are my children. These are the ones that I've put my name upon. These are the ones that I've inscribed my laws upon. And they are my letter. These are my letter meant to be read by all around you. So with a message like this, we were asking the Father, what would you want us to do? And the only thing that I would like to do is to present my heart. Why? Because He's faithful. He's faithful to write the commandments. That's why I want to present my heart. Because it's not, I've tried enough. When I do, I'm going to do this. But He wants humility. He wants a brokenness of heart. He wants a contriteness that says, Father, I don't have the power to write them inside of me, but I will carry them, and I will wait for you, and I will present my heart towards you so that you would inscribe them upon me, so that by your Spirit I may become a letter of yours that is able to be read by all, and I'd be a true covenant carrier of yours. That is what the Father wants to do today. If you have faith for Him to write the Torah upon your heart, then what the Father is calling you to do is to present your heart right now. To present it once again. For Him to write His Torah upon His heart. He's faithful and it will be written upon us. Father of glory, we just praise You for Your faithfulness. Your name is holy. your name is meant to be sanctified by us. Father, we ask you that as we present our hearts today, we ask you that as we surrender who we are and we give up our pride and our self-determination, you would find humility in us and you would inscribe your own commandments upon us. You would find a heart that is pleasing to you, that is contrite, so that you may come and dwell among us, your people. And we would be letters that are read by those who don't know you. And we would be those who work to write your commandments in other hearts. Father, I ask you that you start something again in us today. That you awaken a new humility to come before you and say, I need you to come and write it upon me.